Hello, welcome to this watercolour demonstration. My name is Bill Lupton. I'm sponsored by and an ambassador for the SAA. What I'm going to paint today is a scene just using a natural sponge and a rigger brush. And I started by using the sponge quite wet to wet the whole of the sheet of paper, and then again using the sponge, just applying a very pale blue into the sky. As you can see, it's not too neat at the moment, but I'm not too worried about that. But I'm also putting the water in with just horizontal lines where I think the water might go. And then I'm doing the same with a burgundy red, but it is quite pale, and I'm just adding again into the water as well. And then just using a clean wet sponge with no paint, I'm just dabbing around, and this encourages the sky to move and gives it a little bit of texture. Then what I'll do is go down to the water, and again just using a clean sponge, just dilute those lines across in horizontal stripes. I am an experienced watercolour tutor, and I do run classes in some wonderful places, so why not check out my website and see if you want to come along. Beginners are very welcome. What I did then was allowed the sky and water to dry, and then I've just applied a damp line across where the horizon is, and I'm dropping in some coloured trees using just a small part of the sponge and some blue paint. You'll see me also add a little bit of red into that blue, just to provide some variety on that horizon line. And while that area is still damp, I'm just using the rigger brush to drop in a couple of pale trees. They will fade almost to insignificance, but it does add a little bit of detail on that horizon. And you can see me tapping with a clean damp sponge. This creates a misty look. At that point we need to let the painting dry thoroughly. The reason for that is we want these leaves to be nice and crisp and hard edged. So there we go, that's a nice yellow golden colour, just tapping in around where I think the clumps of leaves might be. And then follow that by using a range of different colours and just tapping in a few leaves into that yellow. I'll also use some reds and some more golds and develop these trees as we go. Using the rigger brush I can add a few branches in there now. Still using the rigger brush, just leaning on the paper a little bit firmer, I can create quite thick trunks for these trees. Using a very similar technique for the growths beneath the trees, I can stab in some leaf shapes using a variety of colours, and then again later you'll see me using the rigger brush to create some stems. Well, as you can see, this is not really a difficult painting to complete. It's about knowing the technique, and if you'd like to know more techniques, and beginners are very welcome, why not check out my website www.thepaintings.co.uk, where you'll find some wonderful courses in some wonderful places. And whether it's a 2-hour course or a full day course, there are lots available, so why not take a look and get in touch. And now the main stems and tree trunks are in, I can start to add some more colours overlapping, so you get some leaves going over the trunks and through the branches. I can begin to work on the other side at this point in the painting, again using the rigger brush for the time being and quite a dark paint. I'm creating the tree structure. Having flicked a few areas of dark paint beneath the tree, I just use a wet brush now to encourage the paint to run down. It allows the tree to root on this foreground bank. I then start to add a little colour into this foreground. Using the sponge in exactly the same way as I did in the distant tree, I start stabbing in a few leaves, variety of colours, reds, golds, greens, yellows. with the rigger brush with a strong red, you can add some large leaves in there just to give it some depth. And now start to work on the foreground. Using the stabbing technique with some dark colours, I'll use some reds and golds in there as well, and also the rigger brush to flick a few grasses. As you can see, it starts to develop nicely as the layers upon layers appear. It's time now to define the edge of these land areas where it meets the water. I generally use quite a dark paint for this, and then I'll water that down with a wet brush and allow some of that to run up into the land and down into the water, as you'll see. With a very wet rigger brush, I'm just encouraging that colour to run down into the water. It's the start of the reflections. While those two areas beneath the land is quite damp still, I'm just using a sponge to wipe them across the water. It just gives it a nice finish. While the water's still damp because I've just wet it with a sponge, I can use a rigger brush and try to create some reflections of what's above. Similar colours, just painted almost a mirror image. Using a damp rigger brush, it's quite easy to pull out the paint by just dragging the wet brush through the water, and it removes paint like a sponge. This is opaque white that I just mixed, quite strong, and I want to put some white into the painting now over these trunks and the branches. So I'm just putting the paint on quite strong, and then you'll see me going with a wet brush later and dilute that paint across the trunk. It provides an almost three-dimensional effect and gives them a really cool feel. And that's the clean water I'm adding with the rigger brush on the left hand side of those trunks, and the white paint will dilute across the trunk and give it an almost three-dimensional feel. Well, I want to make those grasses beneath the trees look really frosty, so I'm using the white paint and flicking a few white grasses in there. Using exactly the same technique, I move over to the right hand side of the painting. Now to soften some of that rich colour in the trees, I'm using the sponge with opaque white. I'm just dabbing across and it pales off a lot of those leaves and adds a lot of white in there, again makes it look quite cold. And the same for the foreground area. Whilst that opaque white is still damp, I'm dabbing in now a little bright yellow. This really does bring the painting alive. Just dabbing in now the last few leaves. Well, there's the finished painting. Let's have a quick look around. Lots of colour, the reflections in the water, and also the wind lines we used with the damp rigger brush. And then you can see the white trunks really do look effective with all those coloured leaves above. And in the distance, faded, those distant trees on the horizon line. Well, I hope you enjoyed that demonstration. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to visit my website, www.thepaintings.co.uk. There are kits on there, courses, classes and all sorts of things you might find of interest. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.